all across Turtle Island, and we're going to be hearing from them. So earlier this year, university campuses across Turtle Island became sites of militant direct action and political activity. Encampments spread like wildfire, enveloping ruling class institutions of higher education into a political crisis that threatened the political status quo. How should we understand the impact of these mobilizations? What lessons can we glean? What can we learn from student organizers from across the country who will come together to reflect on their experiences and offer insights on the road ahead? And I'll just add a little bit of my commentary before I pass it to the speakers to introduce themselves. What I think was amazing about the student encampments, and I was at some of them, but mainly as an observer. I think what the students were able to do was to combine direct action, militant direct action that had a mass character. So you had thousands of students across the country participating in militant direct action and using a diversity of tactics, and you had people from all kinds of political orientations coming together for one unified goal, which is, I think, something that we've really been lacking in our movement over the last year since the genocide has started. So I think it's great that this has started, and I can't wait till the fall semester starts to see what the students have up their sleeves. And what was also incredible was to see how people from the community, so I live in Chicago, and it was amazing to see how there was community support coming from elders, youth. I have kids, and my kids were going to the encampments. So it was really it was creating an experimental space for movement and action and political organizing that was militant and was able to impact the real world. I mean, I do think that it strengthened the hand of the resistance in Palestine during the negotiations to have the political pressure placed on the U.S. administration, which we all know, Israel is the tool, but really the heart of empire is here, and striking the heart of empire was something what the students were doing. So I don't want to keep going on for too long because I want to hear from the speakers mainly, but if you can all just introduce yourselves, let us know who you are. You don't have to say your names and which campus you're joining us from. I'll start. Oh, here to my right.
Hello, my name is Yasmin. I am coming here from Ohio State's campus, and I'm with the organization Justice, Unity, and Social Transformation, JUST.
Hi, my name is Zainab. I am here from Columbia University and was part of the Columbia University Apartheid Divest Coalition.
Hi, I'm Ratom. I'm with UMass Dissenters, and sorry, were there other questions? Okay, great.
Just who you are and which campus you're coming from.
Yeah.
I was an undergraduate student at Cal Poly Humboldt.
Hi, I'm Hassan, and I was in the coalition at University of Chicago.
So many of us watched or participated in the wave of student encampments that became known as the Student Intifada. Can you briefly describe some of the major political players at your campus and the role that they played during the encampments?
So for us at Ohio State, one of the biggest things was the university administration and who makes that up, who has influence over them. The university is essentially owned by famously Zionist billionaire Les Wexner, and so there was a lot of repression as a consequence of that, being one of the major political players, along with the uniquely conservative community surrounding that, being in Ohio. Yeah.
So at Columbia, some of the major political players consisted of university admin, consisting of the university president, the board of trustees, the folks involved for academic discipline, people who were involved in the Israeli government, whether that's through serving on the NYPD Intelligence and Counterterrorism Bureau. Other players consisted of Mayor Eric Adams, and then individuals who are Zionists and were looking to financially influence the role NYPD played on campus to suppress the student protests, as well as pressuring the university administration to take more action.
I can hold it. At the University of Massachusetts, the major political players were also members of the university admin, including our chancellor, and then also the president of all of the University of Massachusetts campuses, who's a famous Zionist, Marty Meehan. UMass also had a unique relationship with Raytheon Technologies, which is a really big stakeholder on our campus and employs, it's the 6th largest employers of our alumni. Our board of trustees and the student code of conduct office also played a major role.
I might use this one. It's funny, I interpreted this question a little bit differently. I was going to talk about a little bit how Cal Poly is kind of unique from other campuses in that it doesn't have many coherent political organizations or like even just like student movement organizations. I was going to talk about how often speaking to like people from other campuses, they describe like the tension between the Maoists and the the huge like group of communists, and then like the different like possible solidarity organizations. And Cal Poly didn't have any of those. We really just had students, alumni, and community members. And I thought that that was, in speaking to other people involved in occupations, that is really unique because it is such a small school, which ultimately worked to our advantage because it allowed people to act really creatively and really horizontally, because there was really no one to tell people what to do. And so everyone was kind of taking cues from each other. But to answer it more similarly to my other panelists, I would say that the key players were really this occupiers, our school president, who actually stepped down last month as a result of the vote of no confidence that happened during the occupation, and a vicious meme campaign that came out of the Cal Poly Humboldt occupation, and the cops. Those were the key players.
Just to add, so I think University of Chicago Encampments shared many of the actors that other people mentioned with its own particularities, but I think a few other groups that I'd like to bring up are parents. For example, we know that the administration was subjected to many coordinated email campaigns by Zionist parents. Faculty, so that goes from neutral faculty, liberal faculty who will support the students' right to free assembly or free speech, but not the divestment demands. And then a faculty for justice in Palestine. Even within that, there are gradations of how much they would support us. Some of them were involved as police mediators. Some of them were involved as mediators within negotiations. That FJ, Faculty for Justice in Palestine, didn't exist until the encampment, which was November, or the sit-in, which was November, and the encampment was May. A few other people, to talk about the police a little bit, I think one shared context that we saw throughout the student uprisings was that campuses are militarized. And so at University of Chicago, that means we're policed by Chicago Police Department, but also University of Chicago Police Department, which is a private security force, as well as other private security and or governmental security. So that includes like allied security, which are unarmed officers. Many of them are recruited from the surrounding neighborhoods. And of course, one of the reasons that these campuses are so militarized is that universities are gentrifiers. And so it's, the discourse of safety, which is used by the universities to justify cracking down on political activity, is initially used to give a sense of buyers' confidence to the parents that when their students go into this gentrified neighborhood, they won't be, for example, a target of crime. And then I guess to break down some of the student political actors, we had the pro-Palestine Student Coalition, which included Students for Justice in Palestine, groups that are dedicated, again, to issues like gentrification, police abolition, many others also, environmental justice. And then we have organizations that aren't explicitly political, but like, for example, the Muslim Students Association, that they played also a big role. And then, in terms of the opposition, there are Zionist students who will literally report you, file complaints. They are part of the apparatus that makes repression work. Frats. There was a frat rally when we took down the American flag and put the Palestinian flag up. And then I guess media is also, I think, another political actor to think about. There are so many different media outlets. There was a right-wing student media outlet that leaked the plans of our encampment a few days before it was planned, and then we rescheduled. That's the Chicago Thinker. But then, of course, there's supportive media, which, just putting into perspective, the war on Palestine, media plays such an important role. Not only, Netanyahu would condemn student protesters in the media, but also, the Supreme Leader of Iran commended the student protests, and also Palestinian resistance, axis of resistance people each mentioned the student Intifada. So it became a political point, and because of that, there were media outlets from everything from the New York Times to Al Mayadeen to local news outlets that were all present, and we had to have a strategy of how to communicate to these outlets. So that's, that was some.
Thank you. And so I'd like to hear a little more, or we'd like to hear a little more about some of the challenges that you faced at the student encampments. What lessons, and what, specific challenges to your unique context, and what lessons you were able to learn from that. And also I'd like to add, if you can, and if it's helpful to, or if you'd like to, share some of the processes for collective self-reflection and discussion and critique that you had, if you did have, and was that helpful, or how was that helpful to to plan for the future, or to distill lessons from this experience?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest things for us in Columbus was a lack of pre-existing organizing infrastructure, precedent to follow, anything of the sort. Columbus has an Ohio State, specifically does not have a very radical history, right? We have the protests from 1968, Vietnam, but not much else to follow in terms of campus organizing. And so when the encampments started to take rise, we had to call on people from all across the state, organizers, affinity groups, and autonomous organizing folks to come in, which was needed in order to have more people who are on the same page politically and everything. However, it did cause a level of infighting, right? Because we're all coming in with different intentions of how we're gonna go about doing an encampment, especially when you have organizations and affinity groups. How do you balance that? Was a really big thing. So we had, when we were putting together the encampment, a really big challenge was we had folks from, the Muslim community and the Arab community on in talking in one ear, and we had folks who we'd brought out, like, and talking in the other ear, and like providing advice and providing insight. However, being from like out of the state and like not actually being a part of like said community or having been on that campus, there was like a lack of like context when it came to making like split time decisions, right? And so admittedly our encampment was a failure. I'm comfortable calling it a failure. We lasted like 6 hours the first time and like 3 hours the second. But yeah, I think that those were some of the biggest challenges we faced, as well as the beginning to a passing of the Enact Campus Act, which essentially limits our free speech on campus, and legally provides Ohio State with the ability to dictate whatever they want as like not appropriate for the campus, as a response to the encampments. So yeah.
So one of the challenges that was unique to the Columbia movement was how we fell short on engaging local communities outside of campus walls. While there was significant involvement from Palestinian-led and Palestinian-focused organizations like Within Our Lifetime or PYM, Palestinian Youth Movement, there was an issue with the lack of engagement around engaging Harlem residents who were continuously battling a historic fight against Columbia University encroaching upon public land by using eminent domain to take over land and displace historically black and brown people, a black and brown neighborhood that is majority working class, keeping in mind like the class divisions that already exist as a result of Columbia just existing as a elite institution. And, you know, reflecting back on the Vietnam War protests on campus back in '68, those students would not have been able to escalate the way that they did if they were not able to rely on the support from Harlem community members to be involved in that and not have that separation between, you know, outside agitator and student. So that was something that I hope this incoming wave of students and the folks who are still there that have not graduated will implement a little more intentionally. Other issues that we dealt with, other challenges consisted of internal divisions that were coming from differences in political ideology, whether this was around how we support the resistance, questions around how we express that as a 180 plus student org coalition, internal divisions on within the Palestinian Students Committee, within the coalition as well, around which political parties in Palestine that they're supporting and how that impacted decision making within the coalition, how that impacted the language that we were using, and, you know, having discord around whether or not we can even openly say in the beginning, are we supporting one state or two state? So also having conversations around, you know, should we be saying from the river to the sea at the bare minimum when the university started putting out statements talking about how this is a hateful saying. So, you know, identity politics resulting in us having this level of conflict. And I don't believe it was unique to just Columbia campus. From my many conversations I've been having with other comrades and other universities, students seem to be dealing with the same thing everywhere. It's also been a huge challenge throughout the lead up to the encampment to get people to support direct action. Over the 2 semesters, the university revoked the charter of Students for Justice in Palestine and Jewish Voice for Peace, which were 2 of the leading organizations that facilitated a lot of the protests, which led to the coalition being created so that these 180 plus orgs are kind of protecting the students that were in this in these 2 other orgs. However, there was a lot of disagreement around whether or not we should even go forward with unsanctioned and unpermitted protests. And, you know, trying to convince people that you're not going to face the same level of militarization and brutality that you would outside of your Ivy League bubble. And I think that was something that people had a rude awakening of and realized following the protests that happened in February, where NYPD was called to shut things down outside of campus gates. So respectability politics versus disrupting at every chance we get was a point of contention, also influencing whether or not we continue forth with the encampment. It was a struggle to get everyone on the same page to move forward with this. There was a lot of fear around it. And then later on, the decision to take over Hinds Hall and liberate it, formerly known as Hamilton Hall, a school building. But I think what allowed us to move forward was being validated and reassured from non-university organizations, community organizations, that we should be using our privilege and every chance we get to raise hell and make it as uncomfortable as possible for university admin and people who are facilitating this genocide. The most notable challenge that I think has continued onward and will continue to be something that we just have to do trial and error with was figuring out the way to care for one another as students. Every time there was a wave of suspensions or direct action happened and people got arrested, the previous wave of students were kind of forgotten about. There were students, and it seemed to be the same group consistently, who were putting themselves at risk, that were threatened with being evicted from student housing, that needed housing support. People, show up in their apartment, refuse to leave. Students who are primarily low income are on full rides to Columbia that consistently are taking the L's that come from, being at the forefront, and, the lack of consistency in the support that they're receiving around academic discipline, legal support, court cases following the liberation of Hinds Hall. So just consistency and ensuring that people are not feeling disposed of after these actions happen, and also around conflict resolution. That was a big one. I think it's a trial and error thing that is continuing, and we'll see where that goes.
I would say, so sort of throughout our movement building process, which for us, our first sit-in was October 25th, and then encampments happened April 26th and then early May. Sort of a consistent issue was scaling and base building. The University of Massachusetts is fortunate enough to have a vibrant and strong political infrastructure, with groups like Students for Justice in Palestine, Young Communist Leagues. We had unions, graduate student unions that had solidarity caucuses with Palestine, and then UMass Dissenters, Prison Abolition Collective. There's just a lot of orgs that are doing a lot of important political work at UMass. But what happened a lot is, in the immediate aftermath of big actions, especially when they went red, we would get a flood of new people, sometimes hundreds of new people in orgs that were typically only containers for 20 or 40 regular organizers. And it's overwhelming and unimaginably difficult, especially if you are a Palestinian woman or an Arab woman and you've been organizing around this cause and all of a sudden are flooded with people who want to be supportive while you're experiencing the genocide of your people. Trying to scale effectively and retain people and build relationships and community in a way that maintains safety, especially as we continue to escalate. And then the other thing that was specific to UMass's context is that we were offered multiple closed-door negotiations with our university admin, and those proved, we engaged in closed-door negotiations twice, once in October in the aftermath of the sit-in, and then once during the encampment, and both times experienced severe dehumanization from the university administration, just a complete lack of good faith. During our encampment negotiation, Palestinian women were dehumanized and experienced like weird racialized misogyny, but then also at the same time as negotiations were happening and we were being begged to take down our tents, hundreds of cop cars were being assembled in parking lots on our campus, which was just such a shocking and like naked violation of trust. So yeah, closed door negotiations were a huge thing that we dealt with that like harmed, I think, like leaders of our movement and our movement as a whole. Another thing is like learning how to keep each other safe beyond the action, as repression from administration pursued us well after our encampments and like the semester ended. Our university has been denying students degrees. It's been one of the things that we've experienced is that our university has combed through surveillance footage of our encampment to target people that they've identified as leaders and charge them, which is something that we could not have anticipated happening. So like learning how to show up for each other and keep each other safe has been a challenge. And then I think another thing that I want to echo from people who've spoken before is how much abundant support existed from our broader community that we didn't know to tap into. And this came through a lot during the encampment where like Western Mass broad groups showed up for us in droves and like provided so much material support from like food to medicine to bodies. And yeah, I think it's part of the structure of universities to be insular and isolated and extractive from their broader communities. And I think a lot of us felt that moment of loss that we could have had such a broader support system had we been more proactive in engaging with the community around us.
So something we did recently in Humboldt was that about 200 people from across like the West Coast and the Pacific Northwest who had participated in student occupations as students or as community members or in whatever fashion. We invited them to come and review the successes and failures of our respective occupations. And a common, it was multiple schools, multiple different groups of people, and I think a common thread throughout the failures that we discussed was this perceived sort of like co-option by people who sought to de-escalate the student occupations and ultimately then robbing them of their power, which is right to create a crisis, a sense of crisis. And so like the overall tone was that liberals or peace police or other de-escalatory groups were taking over the occupations, which was true at Cal Poly as well. Like we definitely suffered from that. Maybe less so because, like I said, there was no established organizations, and so it was really like a person-to-person conflict. And what we kind of sat with that, and then we thought, okay, what do we do with that? And I think that one of the lessons that we learned is that we can't look to those people for permission. Like those of us who want to employ tactics of escalation because we understand that they're the most necessary in order to cause a true threat to the university as a arm of the empire. We have to have faith knowing that those tactics work and not look for permission continually to employ them. Yeah, I would say that was like probably our success and failure thought. Pass it to you.
I guess, yeah, like in conversation with what everyone else has mentioned, I think the question of who gets to decide strategy and who when the decisions are made to escalate and in what form was always like a topic of debate within the encampment. And I guess there's a few factors to that. So one is that so there was kind of an assumption that Students for Justice in Palestine within the coalition would lead strategy in some form. However, many of the people who put in the most work to actually organize the actions and do much of the work were people who were part of the broader coalition of student groups. And within the Students for Justice in Palestine, while there was a history, like a strong history of political organizing, for example, the activism people did to get the trauma center campaign created, pushed the University of Chicago to create a trauma center, which was a 7-year-long campaign that worked with both the community and student activists. There were, like, many of the experienced Palestinian organizers within SJP had graduated, so the kind of assumption that was used before in SJP, that the Palestinians within SJP have the strongest voice, and that therefore, like, you can sort of fall, even though our SJP is non-hierarchical, which isn't the case for any other SJPs within the city of Chicago. Art Institute of Chicago has a different structure. That wasn't able to be used as a guide to say, okay, the Palestinians who are the students in the forefront of the coalition are saying X, and so we will take the cues from this strategy. And then the other thing is that there is a very big Palestinian community in Chicago, and there are many Palestinian-led organizations that organize many of the mass mobilizations in the city through Coalition for Justice in Palestine, which includes U.S. Palestinian Community Network, many other groups. So, and that coalition includes the SJPs from around the city, most of whom are predominantly Palestinian-led. So we brought in many students from these other SJPs, Palestinians, to help in the process of planning the encampment. But as the base expands, and part of the strength of the encampment is that people who are not as identifiable and who are very experienced, and maybe the students don't know of, and there are strengths to the fact that the centralization breaks down. That is one of the strengths of the encampment. So trying to find ways to make decisions day to day, especially as we didn't know that the encampment would last beyond when we started, right? We thought we would get attacked immediately, but it extended into 8 days, negotiations started. So there were so many decisions to be made at different steps, with so many people with different ideas about when to escalate. Different people didn't know each other. And there wasn't this sense of coherent, unified Palestinian leadership that you could say, okay, this is the step to take. There were many other challenges, but I feel like I talked a lot already, so.
Yeah, thank you. So the student encampments, by and large, were organized around central demand for divestment. And there were some campuses that were able to win some concessions on that front to varying degrees. But can you tell us a little bit about some of the concessions that you were able to win, even if they are intangible gains, not necessarily the university divested all investments from Israel, but even things that are less visible. And how do you see this or if you see this as a success of the movement, and if so, how?
I think that for us, one of the biggest gains was, I think a lot of people were radicalized by that moment. I think that Ohio State is in the center of Columbus and is surrounded by a lot of low-income neighborhoods, but it exists in its own little bubble. And so seeing the militarization of our campus was, I think, very eye-opening for a lot of folks, and it tore down the facade that the university is constantly trying to maintain. I think that that was probably one of the biggest things. A lot of organizers were brought into the fold through the encampment and through the student Intifada. I think that another big thing was the rise of faculty coalition. Our FSJP really rose, I think, during that encampment moment. They had started to kind of form a couple weeks before, like, things started to take off with the student movement and started to gain traction. But in that, we saw a lot of professors actually, like, speaking out, which is something that, like, I personally, in my experience on campus, have not really seen. It really energized, like, the surrounding community, and I think it also validated direct action tactics, like, in a lot of people's minds. I think that a lot of people in organizing, in student organizing, in the first few months after October 7th, tried really hard to play things as safe as possible, going into actions, assigning people green, yellow, red, like, there is a green exists, right? Like, but I think that after seeing the widespread creative direct action tactics in March, April, May, I think validated those tactics in people's mind. And I'm really excited to see all of the creativity that will come out of, like, that inspiring moment, I think. Because at least in Columbus and on campus, it was a lot of just, like, marches, right? And, like, I think the encampments really opened up, like, a whole new world of, like, possibilities of what we can do, of what we can build. Yeah.
So as of late, and I think since the end of the school semester and, you know, with Hins Hall and the encampment ending, I think I've been struggling to assess what the material wins were and struggling to agree with other people who have said we won with all this. I think my view of success in this case, as I'm learning, needs to shift a little bit and consider the fact that, you know, we're going to be here for the long run, and the small wins and small actions can spark a lot more and inspire things nationwide or in other cities. And I think those efforts that what we're doing is impactful was really validated by seeing messages from Gaza and from Palestine, from Bisan, to keep going, and that this is making an impact and to do more, especially in moments where there was so much hesitancy around getting a consensus to escalate more after the encampment was reaching, you know, almost 2 weeks. We're so comfortable here, we got to do more. And seeing messages on tarps that were written, thank you, Columbia students, and, you know, unfortunately, like, you need that validation in mass for students to do more, and I think that helped push people and galvanize them more than what was possible before. Keeping in mind our original demands were financial divestment, financial transparency, and amnesty for all students. We did not win those, but most recently, our former university president, Manu Shafiq, she did step down, and in an article, in an article, she did cite that, you know, people gathering outside of her apartment every single night for over a month straight and screaming was impacting her family and mental health, so we're glad that did something. I think another success I realized was seeing the ways students protected each other so that the students who are escalating could continue doing that, and attempts to protect them, students and community members, like, for the first group that set up the initial encampment, people were already sleep deprived from not having slept almost 2 nights before in preparation, then setting up, and then by noon, university admin comes out and says everyone's going to be suspended. Throughout the rest of the evening, students are linking hands, chanting outside, like circling the encampment so that police and university admin can't continue going through. You go to sleep, you wake up, and then you can hear the chanting from the other side of the streets, and turns out we're surrounded by different community organizations facilitating, gatherings outside and kind of serving as a buffer from NYPD coming in and sweeping us. So that was something I thought was a success, because there were a lot of organizations that were not working with each other and were not speaking to each other because of beef that in the grand scheme of things should be put aside. And thankfully it has been put aside. So that was really beautiful to see. I think also ways students protect each other, like, having Friday prayer congregation in the encampment, and then, so many people are outside the encampment trying to photograph students, and, the folks who are not participating holding up tarps so that those students feel safe and continuing to pray there. And just the way the folks who were not inside Hins Hall or were not inside the encampment were still doing what they could to rally outside and join other students in doing that. I think another success was the fact that we were just not only able to start an encampment on campus after so much disagreement and so much hesitancy, and after the first one was shut down, students en masse autonomously with zero planning, students who were so risk averse, held hands and jumped the fence as their comrades were being arrested on the other lawn, and took a second lawn without any coordination or preparation beforehand, linking arms, and this was like triple, quadruple the size of the initial one. And it was so interesting to see how, we had a lot of organization and structure in the first encampment. All those organizers are arrested. Then in the second group, folks who might not have been looped in from the beginning are starting from scratch, and they're still creating something so beautiful, so efficient. They were able to come up with a way to, get more tents and supplies in from outside of campus walls, because everything is barricaded, you can't get things in. Also coming up with a way to ensure there's always food available, so that solved concerns around food security for a lot of folks. Additionally, making sure there's a way for consistent programming to be held on the encampment, whether that's teach-ins, professors holding a class there, or providing the opportunity for different student orgs to do performances and events. So that was really great. Just seeing the ways the student body galvanized around everything that was happening.
Yeah, I'm processing some things. I would agree that it's hard in the aftermath to assess things clearly, or to agree with so many people who point to the student intifada as a historic win. I think there's some things that I can point to specific to UMass context. Our target for the coalition's campaign was Raytheon Technologies in a major way, and then other war profiteers that enjoy exclusive partnerships with UMass's research and alumni resources. Raytheon Technologies had private recruitment events at UMass leading up to this year, but they weren't present at our recruiting fairs, citing like the campus environment. I don't know if that's a girl. We also presented a divestment proposal which passed with 77% of the student body vote at the Board of Trustees meeting this past June. that felt kind of hollow, but it was a very clear articulation of a path to divestment that our SGA worked on and passed. And we also had a no confidence vote of our chancellor, I think 2 weeks after the poor kid was inaugurated. And that also passed. But I would say I echo other people's sentiments that some of the strongest things to come out of our encampment and our campaign overall is the coalitions that have formed. We have a very extensive coalition at UMass currently of not just SJP, FJP, and Dissenters and other political student organizations, but also our graduate student unions and other staff and faculty unions, librarian unions that are committed to making our demands part of their strikes and their demands and negotiations with the university, which is really exciting. And the radicalization of the student body is also a huge win that we can point to. But yeah, it's tough to assess wins when you're also looking at the cost or the harm that organizers have experienced and that students have experienced, and it's difficult to not I don't know. Yeah, it's difficult to make those assessments when it feels like we didn't know how to protect each other and ourselves better, and like I wish we had those resources or that guidance. Yeah, I don't really have an articulated thought on that, but I wanted to mention that aspect of things.
I'm gonna pause. How's everyone feeling? Good? Do we want to get up and stretch or do something to get back in our bodies? Can listen, to be able to listen more. Shake it out, maybe. Yeah, maybe take a second to grab a snack because I think we're good on time.
Okay. I might grab it.
Yeah, go for it. Good, how are you? Thank you. Thank you, yeah. Do you want me to let the crowd know or the speakers?
The panelists.
Yeah.
Also crowd, we're nothing is
Sure. Good to hear.
How are you? I'm good. Wait, you were here yesterday? Yeah. How's it going? I didn't know you were here. Sorry, I'm like
No, I finished up this past semester. I was in grad school, so now I'm back in Atlanta. What about you?
I'm doing
Testing.
I live in Northern Virginia now, but you said I like
Hi.
all respect.
before the, oh, like at the end, after the panel, and then before the Q&A. No problem. Sure. Yeah, yeah, it's fine.
Like kind of thing where it's like, I ended up
So
going
Mark,
to
last night,
GW
we were like walking with you for a long time with like Democracy Now. We
Yes.
were like trying to get in there.
Yes,
That's like
yes.
why we're in Chicago. We're
Okay.
basically like, please, we need a national government in Canada.
Okay, okay.
Test.
Okay, oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, I'll pass you the mic as soon as I. Okay, I'm going to give folks another minute to come back and have a seat because we want to hear from our panelists. If someone can let the folks outside know that we're going to start again. Okay.
If anybody's interested, we have a lot of resources on investment and experience.
Thank you. Maybe if you talk to the welcome table, and maybe. Oh, okay. Perfect. All right. Are we ready to resume? Please make your way back.
How you feeling?
I feel better. I just drank some coffee.
For
Good.
sure.
I'm excited to talk about the successes.
Yeah. I was just telling somebody, I'm like, wow, I was watching each of your campuses like on Instagram and stuff, and we're in person. It's beautiful.
All right.
So funny.
Before I pass it off to our friend from Humboldt, just to refresh everyone's memory, we're asking a question of strategy about some of the concessions that some of the campuses were able to win, both tangible and intangible. So.
I think definitely the major success of the occupation at Cal Poly was this. Okay, so I think that there's the way that the tenor of student occupations was changed after the occupation at Cal Poly Humboldt as a result of number one being, if not the first, one of the first occupations to occupy a building, right, to actually take physical space. Or like the manifestation of physical space, and to have an immediate fight that we won against the police. And I think, yeah. Beautiful. It was a beautiful, beautiful thing that happened. And I think in doing so, you know, which I think actually maybe I can describe a little bit if people haven't seen what happened, which was that there was a group of students who occupied Siemens Hall, which later became Intifada Hall, right? And those students were met with almost immediate police brutality. People were batoned and beaten in the head, and there was a crowd of students that gathered outside of the hall, and together the students inside were able to physically repel the police out of the building, at which point the students outside were able to kettle the police and force them off of campus. So after that happened, the students outside were able to be let into the occupied building, and there's this like meeting of forces, right, of the sort of this manifestation of what I think we've talked a little bit about on this panel, which is like the ways that we can provide support for each other as students. And I think that moment made it so that it made this explicit gesture that the pro-Palestinian movement must be a movement against the police, right? We have to establish that here. I think that also the other success was that hundreds of young people saw that they had the power to repel the police, to repel this like manifestation of the domestic manifestation of the empire abroad, right? And that is an insane feeling of agency to give people, and this insane belief that we can have in ourselves. And the physical experience of that is ultimately going to give people the self-confidence much more than like we can ever convince people talking to them, right? I'm just gonna, sorry, I get nervous talking in front of people, but drink some water. I also wanted to talk about divestment and not using divestment as a measure of success, right? Because often, I mean, we see at UC Riverside and UC Irvine that, and even what some of the other panelists have been describing of divestment being promised and not given. And I think that the universities will never give us divestment. They can't. That is antithetical to the way that they operate. And even if they, promise divestment, there are all these other ways that the university funnels students into the different branches of the military-industrial complex. Like, even if they're not directly investing in weapons manufacturers, the ways that we push students into certain programs that will ultimately lead them to contributing to the various branches of empire, that is how the university functions. So divestment, I think, while a worthy goal, cannot be our success. It can't be what we are aiming for. I think that what we're aiming for is creating a movement that combats empire, and we shouldn't be limited to divestment. We have to attack all fronts that even make university investment in foreign military prospects possible, And so I think that shift has to be made, that we have to acknowledge that, and I think that that's what made the Cal Poly Humboldt occupation and the militancy that people brought to it possible, right, is that we understood that we had to make our demands unmeetable. Because if we gave them a meetable demand, then the occupation would end. And our student occupation, we didn't want to end. We wanted to create this unending sense of crisis for the university as a manifestation of the US empire, because we wanted to create an unending crisis for the US empire. Because as long as the empire exists, then the fight is not over. And I think offering that perspective to students is really important, because you teach them that they have to, I am a student there, and I'm often talking to other students, and especially during the occupation, thinking about how do we make it clear that this is a fight for your life, and this is a fight for your whole life, right? To fight against, because it will just continue to crop up and continue to manifest in different ways, which I'll speak to more later, but I'll hand the mic over to you now.
No, that was beautiful. I think that was very well expressed. And also, I just want to say that I feel so much love and solidarity with the fact that I'm with you all in person, because part of it is each success that other students at other encampments had manifested themselves in the local situation, right? The fact that the Columbia encampment was so powerful and so disruptive, it changed the way that our administration dealt with us. Similarly, the Cal Poly, right, when we were seeing this is giving us, again, energy, hope, inspiration. So just the fact that we're in the room together and we're reflecting and we're still here, part of it is having the long breath, right? Being able to resist. Then we can't always have the same pace. This is kind of a downswing, right? It's we're outside of the school year. Still, of course, the situation in Palestine, this is the worst genocide Palestinians have been subjected to since maybe history in terms of the scale, and it's still continuing, but even militant groups never maintain the same pace of operations, even if you look at the militants that are actually fighting on the ground. I guess, yeah, so there was a quote I wanted to bring from a Palestinian revolutionary named Bassel al-Araj. he was, right after the encampment, like an autonomous group occupied the Institute of Politics building on our campus and renamed it after Bassel Araj. And Bassel Araj was assassinated, I believe, in 2000, either the late 2010s or the early 2020s. And he had a quote, which was that resistance is an accumulative benefit. And what he's referring to is, he's talking about the experience of the Palestinian Intifadas. Like the first Palestinian Intifada, which was 1987 to 1993, what did the first Intifada, what happened historically after that was the Oslo Accords, right? The Oslo Accords, which meant the creation of the Palestinian Authority, which was led by a comprador class of Palestinians in complete subordination to the Israeli occupation, that coordinate with Israel to assassinate people who resist Israel, that facilitated, it didn't fight against the continual colonization of Palestine, right? It's like a moment when the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, basically capitulated. It made a compromise, right? That was the quote unquote, we could say, the result of the first Intifada in some way. And the quote that Bassel Araj is giving, resistance is an accumulative benefit, it's actually in response to the second Intifada, which was 2000 to 2005, I believe. What did the second Intifada result in? We could say, I think it's important to be clear, like the way I'm describing it is the anti-resistance. Like if you think about it this way, you always think about it against the resistance. It's kind of like the Zionist US way of, it's not just like a propaganda narrative, it's like kind of a mentality, right? After the second Intifada, what happened? Life got worse for Palestinians. The separation wall, the apartheid wall was built, right? The war on terrorism expanded, right? But what Bassel Araj is pointing out is that after each of these, right, you have to look, like the colonization of Palestine began 100 years ago with British imperialism. There was the Palestinian Revolution, 1936 to 39, right? That's what, like today when we have, like, you know, the Palestinian resistance names its brigades after Qassam, they're naming them after Palestinian resistance fighters from the 1930s. Each phase of resistance, of popular struggle, builds a critical consciousness. It builds a repertoire of solidarity, of cultural products, of building like material things like weaponry, right? Even Hezbollah, it resisted the Israeli occupation in 1982. Each time Israel fought against Hezbollah, they inflicted way more losses on the Lebanese civilians than Israelis took, right? But still, by 2006, Israel was like, right, Hezbollah is like, what I'm trying to say is that you can't judge the products of you can't judge the products of resisting empire based on the immediate material impact of what comes after. And I think we have to look at that with our student movement, right? Like now with this student uprising, we have given, from 4 years from now, the students from Chicago Public Schools who were doing their high school walkouts on our campus during the encampment, how much resources and how much knowledge will they have to draw on, and how many new tools and forms of, like, their ability to struggle has been raised by the investment that we've made. It's an investment for, like, we're investing for like the next generation, the generation, 2 generations after us, 3 generations after us, right? Even like today, you know, this idea that we're fighting against the police, there's Black Palestinian solidarity. This didn't come out of nowhere. Like there's Occupy Wall Street 2011 with the Arab Spring at the same, like the Palestinians were engaged in that. And then again, 2014, Israel invades Gaza, there's the Ferguson uprisings. Again, Palestinians and Black people. And again, Black Lives Matter 2020. Did any of these struggles end? None of them ended, and the police killings are still happening. There's still incarceration, but in each stage you can see the struggle is getting more experience, it's learning. The main thing is, I think, the main victory is that the Palestinian struggle in the US has not been co-opted, and that's, I think, what we have to fight against.
Thank you. And this kind of segues nicely into the next question, which is more of a question of analysis. And I'm going to start with on my left this time. But I'd like to hear what your sense of where things are at in the Palestinian solidarity movement overall, and whether you think that the student encampments have reached their limits, or did they find new solid ground or new footing, and what's needed to build a stronger and more militant movement.
Do you want to hit it first? I feel like or do you need a break?
If you have something to say, you're welcome to. I can't answer.
I'd like to hear you.
Okay. I think, well, we're in a downswing in terms of the movement. Like, just to be completely honest, I think the march on the DNC, it didn't match this. It didn't. If we just, people should participate in protesting the DNC, and it has a positive effect. People should do it. People should follow the leadership that's calling to do those, and escalate them. But it doesn't match the global impact that the encampments had. And we're also like after the school year, right? Like many of it, we're trying to organize in the summer, but like inherently sometimes you see like with student organizing, it's a phase of reflection and consolidating lessons. But I think the encampments are not dead. Like as a tactic, I think encampments can still be effective. There are so many schools that tried them and they could do them better this time. There are so many schools that the tools of repression have gotten harsher. So to do them would be a even bigger step. And I think like in terms of just like the divestment struggle, I completely agree with your analysis that when we're asking these private institutions to divest, we're asking them to act against their material. And we're asking billionaire Zionists to not be billionaire Zionists. So the thing is like, how can you isolate those people and how can you build the base of people that is opposing them and consolidate it and continue radicalizing it? So there's so many steps that need to be taken to that to make the movement, yeah, I don't know. In terms of like protest momentum, we're in a downswing and we need something new. I guess that's what I'd end with.
So yeah, I would definitely agree that I think that there's a lull. And when we think about how do we make a stronger, more militant student movement, I think that I would draw even on what some of the other panelists were talking about earlier of like how upon reflection, understanding that broadening it from a student movement and making it and reaching into the community and like sort of getting rid of this idea that it is just students struggling, right? Like I think that the sort of disillusion of the student movement into where their community ties are surrounding is necessary. I think it's also necessary that people must link these battles, the liberation of oppressed people in the US and the liberation of people that are globally oppressed by the US have to be one fight. And I think that we have to create this sense that we are fighting for our own liberation as well, right? Like these liberations have to be tied so that people can sustain a lifelong fight for them. To truly be in solidarity with Palestine, we have to fight for ourselves alongside the Palestinian struggle, right? It's a struggle against empire in all of its forms. Like this is my first time in Chicago, and a comrade was telling me about the survivors of police torture in Chicago and how huge of a like organizing network that is here, and like this immense, massive impact that has had on the city. And I was thinking, it's like when we understand, right, when the connection is made to people that the U.S. police force cross-trains with the IOF, that those are the same branch, right? Then it becomes even more crucial for us to understand that we have to constantly be fighting here. Like the resistance has to be one in our minds so that people can give themselves permission to be fighting for it, as if it was central to their own lives. Because when you create this sense that it is our duty to fight against empire, I think people feel as if they can act more militantly because it hits home. Like if you bring it home, then it hits home. And I think that was part of why the student movement was so successful, is that there is this ability to create a sense of crisis that was domestic, right? Like I think that what the Humboldt delegation really set out to do was to be like, okay, for sure, like this university is ignoring this crisis in Palestine, right? And so let's make a crisis for them here so that they can't ignore it. And I think that sentiment has to grow stronger. And I think that that can only be done, yeah, when we allow the movement and allow the student struggle to sort of dissolve into this historical network of community struggle that is happening in all these places where the student movements rose up.
So I think when it comes to student encampments, yeah, it definitely is difficult to answer because, yeah, we are in a little bit of a lull since the semesters have not yet started or have just started. But I think that a lot of the things that have happened over the summer and over the past few days have shown us that the minds of the people are still with Palestine, and that is a very powerful thing, and that is not going to go away just because there isn't necessarily a spike in action. I think that the Palestinian solidarity movement is constantly growing, but universities who have faced student militancy have a tendency to think that they can just wait them out, because summer comes around and no one's on campus, or like the leaders graduate in 4 years and they're gone. And we need to rely on community mobilization, and I definitely second everything you said, in that we need to build with the people who are surrounding our campuses, especially because they're the ones who are, if anything, facing the brunt of the harm from our campuses, right? From the over-policing to ensure students are safe, from the money that is invested into our campuses and into whatever useless bullshit projects they have going on, instead of the fact that there are unhoused people literally right outside of that bubble. There are people who don't know where their next meal is coming from. And I think that we need to understand our position, and those are the people who we need to be building with. And that is a way of expanding our capacity and ensuring that there is no cycling out in 4 years, right? Because these people live here. Like, there is no like summer lull, and there's just a constant, we can maintain a constant sense of crisis throughout the nation. I also think that we need to develop a better understanding of political strategy. I think something that happened a lot with encampments is seeing them as like an end of themselves rather than a means to an end, right? And it's about like, how long can we defend it rather than like, how do we use it to gain leverage over administration? I think that that's one of the biggest shifts in mindset that we kind of need to adapt. I think that the spread of the encampments was really good and really powerful, but I also think that we need to each individually in our communities assess where we're at and strategize and choose tactics based on that rather than what's gaining traction. And especially as we're faced with like an increasingly hyper mechanized surveillance state where they are constantly adapting to whatever it is they're doing, right? The encampments rise at Columbia. Every other university before an encampment even pops up is like figuring out, okay, how do we prevent this from starting? So I think that constant assessment and reflection is something that is going to be really crucial going into fall semester and going into the school year, because as we escalate, our enemies are always going to escalate in ways we can't even see. And it's important to constantly work and mobilize and create strategy that does not revolve around asking like those in power to agree with you.
I envision these upcoming months being a period for folks to reckon with the fact that they gotta really dig their heels in, and repeating what my co-panelist said, finding ways to get creative and do something different besides the encampment, recognizing that, you know, we're not just in an insular bubble. Within our college campuses, there are communities that have been here for a much longer period than we have, and they're not transient, and really reckoning with what it means to have discipline in the struggle, what it means to have intention and stand on principle. I think those 3 points can really help us reckon with the limitations that we do have, and the inconsistencies that keep popping up, especially around class and race and gender dynamics that are so, you know, frequently causing conflict in our movement. And I think that also informs the sustainability of things continuing forward. I believe if people are more intentional with questioning why they're here, why they're in this movement, why was this important to them, why they care about Palestine, I think that'll do a really great service to us as we're in community with each other and how we're interacting with people outside of our campuses, and also help us be a lot less reactionary in how we move.
I wanted to take a second to revisit how I discussed the material concessions and gains of the movement, because y'all are like changing my mind in real time, and like I just feel just the need to express and like illustrate the beauty of what happened at UMass, because our encampments and our movement, like, okay, speaking for my own experience, I graduated in 2023 and I was supposed to go to grad school this fall, and that didn't happen because ew. And in the same time that I made that decision, things escalated. Al-Aqsa flood happened, and then 2 weeks later I was at UMass at this sit-in, and I didn't even know what organizing was. I didn't know that it was a thing. I didn't know anything about anything. I had been radicalized ideologically in massive ways by the BLM movement, and I'd been in the streets, but I didn't know what infrastructures existed beyond that. And now I can confidently say that I was a leader in our political movement at UMass, and that I did a lot to organize the actions that happened there. And I know that that like growth is not unique to me, and that our movement brought in so many people, students and community members that had never known about organizing and had never known about like the possibility of this new world prior to this moment. And that's huge. And the idea of like protracted struggle, and struggle being the accumulation, as you mentioned, is something that we saw like so beautifully illustrated. The fact that our encampments were able to offer people a glimpse into what the world could be like if we cared about each other, and like how immediately different the space was that the encampments occupied on the university, how easily the artificial borders of campus were shattered by the world that we created there. I could see it changing people. Like, people showed up to our encampment that I had never met before, and they were like, how are y'all doing this? And we were like, they gave us pizza. And it's it was amazing to give people hot food and free medicine and housing and care, and like to build that off of love and resistance. And I forgot the question, but I just wanted to say that part. Oh yeah, speaking on like where the movement is at right now, I think there is a lot of reflection happening. I will say, in the context of UMass, there's a lot of people are trying to shake shit up right now still. Our university has chosen July to hand out campus bans. accusing students of trespassing on their own universities and trying to charge people with felonies. And that has galvanized people, even though we are dispersed. I also know that the brilliant, talented, incredible, determined people that I was able to fight alongside are organizing all fucking summer. People are in Canada, they're in DC, they're in New York, they're in their homes, and they're in the community of UMass continuing to organize. We've also been incredibly lucky to be able to pass the baton off to organizations like Western Mass JVP and Families for Palestine. They've continued an encampment in Northampton and in Amherst that has been like a beautiful summer school for kids to come learn about Palestine for free. So yeah, there has been a lot of room for conversations within and between organizations about what the future of organizing looks like at our universities. And I wanted to echo the idea of like constant assessment and reflection as being central to the work we're doing right now.
Thank you. Honestly, in all of your reflections, I got goosebumps from some of the things that you had been reflecting on, and I've learned a lot from all of you, and I really appreciate your analysis. I do want to leave some time for Q&A, so if I can start with you again, in maybe 2 or 3 minutes, can you tell us how are student organizers drawing lessons directly from Palestine and shifting strategies and tactics based on the leadership provided on the ground there?
Is it okay if I pass it to anyone else
Yeah,
who
of
feels
course,
more
of course.
prepared to respond? I think I need a
Of
second.
course.
Does anyone else feel?
Go for it.
I think one of the important things that makes the Palestine solidarity movement in the United States successful is that the Palestinians who've started the organizations, the organizational infrastructure for this, were very clear that there shouldn't be factionalism in terms of which political ideology in Palestine people are aligning themselves with publicly. And that's something that we see in the Palestinian resistance and in all of the global resistance to Israel, right? People can unify based on supporting Palestinian human rights or Palestinian self-determination or the end of Zionism or the end of United States imperialism or the end of the global capitalist system. Like the Beijing conference that Palestinians all, right, it was very easy for Hamas to say, we're the strongest power. Everybody else has to subordinate their ideology to ours in order to participate in the resistance struggle. But actually what they did is they had meetings with people who they had, actually even Fatah, even the Fatah that's part of the Palestinian Authority, they had agreements because they had discussions and came to a national framework because they understand that you need to have unity among the people. And so that's like one level is like unity among people who are engaged in the political level of the struggle, but also you need to have the support of the, like what is called the popular cradle, right? If you have, like for example, if there's a militant in Jenin that decides I'm gonna go do X, he's supported because he's part of the community, because people trust him, because he grew up there, because his family is there, because there's a culture of supporting people who are protecting the safety of their community, right? He's not just one individual that decided based on an idea in his head that he knows what to do and he's gonna do it. Escalations are, like attacks, militant attacks are based on an understanding that the people stand with the guerrillas, right? The people stand, and that is always based on consultations and continued being, like, right? You're not just in the revolution and then everybody else is supposed to follow you. You have to continue, that's like a key, I think one of the key things. And then the other thing is like patience and steadfastness. Like Israel tried so hard to break the people of Gaza's will and to turn them against the resistance. And the steadfastness and the patience of people in Gaza and people in Lebanon and people in Yemen who are subjected to starvation, bombardment, so many, right? Like that is the key factor that affects the negotiating conditions. by people in Gaza being patient, that changes what Biden is able to do or not do. And like, also strategic patience, like you don't have to play all of your cards at once. That's one of the things that like made the universities relatively strong in the negotiations, is that at any time they can just call them off and call in the police. So we had to consider what are our cards that we can play and at what time can we play them. Yeah.
Anyone wants to add thoughts to that point? Yeah, please.
I definitely second everything you said. I think that Palestinian organizers, like any other organizing hub or movement, have a plethora of like methodology and ideological difference. I mean, like even yesterday's panel, we were talking about prison abolition, and there was talk of like reform versus abolition, right? You're always gonna have all of these different tactics and all of these different ideologies. And I think that what leadership in Palestine shows us is that we need to win by any means necessary, but we are organizing from different material backgrounds and conditions. And so by any means necessary looks different from place to place. And I think the biggest thing is the steadfastness for sure. I completely second that. I think that they show us that the fight can't let up and that it is something greater than ourselves. And yeah.
Can someone tell me if we're good on time? Yeah? Okay. So I want to move it to the next question, and I want to hear from everyone. Briefly, because we can have a whole conference about this, but what are some next steps in your work, and what can people do to support? If you can give us like key points, like what people can do to support. I'll start with on my left.
So like I said, in Humboldt, we recently had this gathering where we put out this large call to people that were relatively regional to us and asked for people who had participated in student occupations, who perhaps felt disappointed or felt like they had wanted more from them, or who saw that as an opportunity to continue and to expand that fight, to come and gather together and sort of spend time with each other and build actual relationships. And I think doing stuff like that is what is next for people. Like we said, expanding the struggle into the community, building networks. I think that you talked a lot, other panelists were talking a lot about what do we do, right, when the moment is over and people are left to deal with the consequences. And the only way that I think we can really do that is by supporting each other, by making them not consequences, but rather things that we figure out together as communities. And I think that is the only way that people will have the resilience to fight for their whole lives, right? To continue. And I think something that I was thinking about when you were speaking was what was created during these occupations, right? And I think consistently when I'm speaking to students at CPH, what they describe is these moments of rupture, they create these pockets of true reality, right? Because I think as students, people are beginning to understand that we are being asked constantly in America to live in a lie. We are constantly being asked to buy into and perpetuate this massive fraud. And in these moments of rupture, when the university and everything that it represents becomes, it falls, right? When we get to actually, whatever break down barriers, build new ones, when there's no more administration, when you don't have to go to class, when you're allowed to smoke on campus, when you're allowed to do these small things that happen, when you're allowed to bring community members onto campus and feed people, you know, and truly like learn what you want to, you are treating the world as it is. Like, you are reacting in the most real way possible to what is happening when we have this massive sense of crisis globally and domestically. And so I think that like trying as much as we can at every moment to push towards those moments of rupture, because what we've given people is this view. That was the thing that I heard just consistently from participants in the occupation, was like, that was the most real thing I've ever done in my life. And I think a lot of people felt that during the 2020 insurrection. And I think that that is what we have to continue to push for, is like, how do we create opportunities that truly break down, allow people to envision what the world is when we truly break down these manifestations of empire. And focusing on that and trying to recreate that, I think, will ultimately like be our largest tool, in the actual breakdown of empire. So I think that that is what I'm taking from this.
I feel like first I would just say, I think sometimes student organizers can fall into the trap of seeing the struggle as against the university rather than as against imperialism, where universities are one site within a military, industrial, academic complex, or within just the capitalist system, right? And so with that in mind, like, I would say, and I think also students are, they're not a class. They're like kind of like, you come in, you're privileged for 4 years, you get to learn so much, you have time, like, so I think more it's a question of what students can do to support others' work. And I think people spontaneously supported students in so many ways that we didn't even conceive of or couldn't expect, whether from food or advice on how you negotiate, or advice on how to put a tent in the ground, because some people I'm not good at, like, you know, like, there's so much that we don't know, and I think the community is right. Like, the people know how much to support the work, so I think it's more of a question of like how can students get more in touch with the needs of working people, and and I guess in terms of Palestine, like, I would just say I personally try to focus a lot on the struggle of Palestinian political prisoners and uplift that, and I know that there are panels on that coming up, so as people who have like a strong history of like abolitionist organizing in the city of Chicago, I think that's a good like avenue for us to take. There are close to 10,000 Palestinian political prisoners. They are also being subjected to slow killing or fast killing. So yeah, I would just like, if we can find ways to keep them in mind, and I have like suggestions if people want.
So next steps for, next steps for our work, I think, is like a lot of mutual aid. I think that one of the biggest things we realized is we were like, I'm like, how has no one fed people on this campus? No one's just came and handed out food. Like, people are hungry. And I think that mutual aid like really is one of the biggest things that came out of that, because I think that that's something that I've never seen happen on our campus outside of the encampment. Like, providing people with a place to sleep, providing people with meals, providing people with hygiene products. That's something that has never happened on our campus. And I think that that's something that going into the fall is going to be really big, as well as education. I think that there is a lot to learn from the people who came before us, and it's a lot of people, and there has been a lot of history that parallels our moment in different ways, whether it be the Vietnam anti-war movement, whether it be specific moments from the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement. I think that there is so much to learn and so much knowledge to draw on, and I think that we get in our heads a little bit with no one's ever done this before, no one's ever been in this specific moment before. But I think that even if the specific conditions that we're in right now and this exact moment has never existed, there are aspects that have, and there are people that have fought against them, and there are people who have found ways to subvert different surveillance tactics, different repression tactics, whatever that may be. So I think that education and mutual aid coming out of that movement are a lot of the biggest steps.
Echoing what a lot of was said already about getting involved in community orgs and the work that's already happening, I also want to stress to students to not let things be at a standstill and not let this just be a pause. I keep thinking about the Stop Cop City movement in Atlanta, Georgia, and how summer 2020, the uprisings did not stop, and efforts to mobilize against Cop City were already in movement, and in the past couple of months, seeing the way the focus has been on, the importance for Palestinian non-Black communities to uplift Black liberation at the same time, and to continue talking about how, you can't be talking about Palestine and police brutality and how NYPD is unleashing this level of force on pro-Palestine protesters without talking about, why policing exists. And I think that's something internally within our communities as well. We need to do a lot of work on that. And I think also grounding ourselves in the struggles that took place before us, at the same time as we continue to uplift Palestinian political prisoners and making sure that we don't forget about them. Also grounding ourselves in the fact that a lot of political prisoners are still held without trial from the Black Liberation Movement, especially folks like Imam Jamil Al-Amin and Mumia Abu Jamal, people whose incarceration is tied directly to the work that we're doing for the Palestinian Liberation Movement here, and how that impacts Palestinian political prisoners in Palestine. And, making sure we're not just isolating ourselves to our campus community, which can be very insular, and forgetting about what's happening outside. And the last thing I wanted to say was making sure we center Gaza, that we center and uplift Gaza and not let it become about free speech, because a lot of the schools are trying to detract from the main point. Like, there was a lot of actions happening from Faculty for Justice in Palestine on Columbia, and for some reason the news just wants to talk about how all these faculty members gathered to protest against repression and student speech being shut down. So making sure it stays on Palestine.
Yeah, I actually really want to underscore that last point, even though I agree with so much of what's been said, centering Gaza and not letting the movement be co-opted into a conversation about students' rights, free speech, students being arrested, even though that might feel more comfortable to rally behind. Girl, that is not the point. And I think so many student movements have been very explicit about that. I would want to mention, I've been trying to find another way to say this, but owning our privileges while we're students and serving and protecting, but like not in that way, and meaningfully destructing the real and artificial borders of our campus to serve these communities that, as my co-panelists have mentioned, are not transient. And yeah, like deconstructing how extractive colleges are set up to be, I think is a major forward movement that would help us connect more with our community, which we've said over and over again is so important. And then when it comes to how people can support, I know UMass was flooded with money in the aftermath of our raid, which felt really weird. And I think if people are looking for ways to support students, obviously our hearts are warm that is such a sentiment among people. But I would ask that you volunteer your time and your bodies and build relationships with students and offer resources. Make sure that students are well resourced even after they graduate, making sure that they have paths to continue to be involved in organizing. Yeah, but like money is odd, especially after experiencing like violent police harm. So I would encourage people to find other ways to connect with the student intifada.
Thank you, everyone. Before I open it up for Q&A, I'd like to pass the mic to someone from our audience who's visiting from Boise. You can hear this one.
I'm just going to read a statement. We're coming from Boise, Idaho right now. We're autonomous organizers representing our Solidarity encampment on occupied land of Shoshone-Bannock peoples. We call ourselves the People's Liberated University for a Free Palestine. And I want to thank these organizers for the mic and for all of you being in attendance. I'm going to read this as quick as possible. As of today, we have been occupying the state capitol lawn for 112 days straight. We've endured 20 plus raids by Idaho State Police, top to bottom. As of a few weeks ago, we have won legal protections against these unlawful raids. Occupying for Gaza and Palestine in Boise has never been as safe as it is today. The PLU stands for Liberation of Palestine and all oppressed peoples globally. We stand in solidarity with all forms of resistance against imperialism, capitalism, and state oppression. We work from a mindset of mutual aid. We have hosted over 75 educational teach-ins and hold weekly grief and rage circles for locals to process in community the genocide we're witnessing and the police violence we have endured on the lawn so far. We have autonomous meal makers feeding us hot meals 3 times a day since May 3rd. The local Palestinian population is small yet vocal, and we give space for their voices to be heard in the state of Idaho. For context, Idaho is the hotbed of white supremacist Nazis and Christian Zionists and a testing ground for repressive legislation nationwide. This encampment has changed Boise forever. Not only are we educating and making space for our local community, but we continue weekly with food distro for our unhoused neighbors, hold space for them to sleep, and have opened a second free community refrigerator locally thanks to the increased interest in mutual aid in Idaho. Our encampment is unique in the way that we were entirely prevented from establishing on the lawn of Boise State University, our local college. Because of a leak and a violent doxing of an organizer the morning of our first march, the school militarized and emptied the campus of all witnesses while deploying snipers on roofs pointed at our intended location. We chose to pivot to state property instead and set up outside of the Idaho Capitol building as students and community members from all walks of life. The Idaho State Police and the Idaho Department of Administration has tried to squash our camp through continued theft of property, psychological violence, unlawful arrests, and felony charges, including large lawsuits as well. One of our comrades has been targeted and is fighting felony malicious harassment charges for chanting in the streets downtown. Idaho Department of Administration believe that calling for an end of genocide publicly is a hate crime worthy of criminalizing with jail time. We are tired. We are here in Chicago to make our encampment known. We ask you to find our Instagram and share it widely. We ask you to use your organizations and media connections to make one of the last and longest standing solidarity encampments known nationally. We desperately need refreshed energy. Just spending 2 days in this beautiful city of Chicago, we have recognized the continuities in erasure, ignorance, and police violence. Everything spoken about on this panel, we are still actively enduring. We are working class people coming from all backgrounds, including local students from a variety of colleges and universities. We want to shout out our own local Palestinian voices in Idaho who call themselves Boise to Palestine. And we are proud to be representing the People's Liberated University and Boise to Palestine in Chicago today. We are your comrades and in solidarity with all you do here. And we ask you to be in solidarity with us with what you can offer. Come to Boise, witness us, help us make the PLU a national conversation. Palestinian solidarity exists everywhere, and even more uniquely so in the heart of the empire in rural America. And personally, I would like to add that all of these lessons that this panel has discussed, we have also experienced. We only felt safe to begin the occupation because we were successfully able to call together a dozen local organizations to mobilize. All we asked was that each org dropped their own flags and picked up a Palestinian flag, something we have never seen happen in Boise, and are proud to have found ourselves in solidarity with so many different organizations willing to do that for Palestine. The interpersonal dramas and mediations have been abundant, and the relationships forged through hard conversations and learning will be lifelong. We refuse to identify leaders of this movement, as all action has been entirely autonomous, and we work daily against the cops in our heads and hierarchies of all kinds. We have welcomed brand new activists that have spent their entire summer in this liberatory space, and we are proud of what we have done with our short time so far and look forward to seeing what these new comrades do in their future. Without Boise's strong mutual aid networks birthed from the pandemic and national 2020 uprisings, we could not have successfully held our ground for as long as we have. And we will continue to occupy Boise State Capitol until Palestine is free. Please find us later and connect. We want to share and collaborate with all of you. We need you right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Since we're a little over time, I just want to get a pulse check from the audience if there are questions. Yeah? So we'll take 2 questions, maybe 3 at a time, and we'll have the panel respond. Can I see hands for questions? Let's start with you. I saw you first.
Yeah, I just want to thank y'all for being here because, before the student encampments happened, it was the economic blockades. And in my personal opinion, when the students encampment popped off, that was when Palestine went mainstream and the media and the public could not ignore it. So definitely want to thank y'all for being here. And as far as just the question is just was there already radical student organizing in your campus, or was Palestine the issue that radicalized the students?
Okay. Take 2 more questions before we start to hear the answers. Let's go with you.
Yeah, peace. Second everything just said. My question is about labor, because there have been several calls by the General Federation of Palestinian Trade Unionists to call for a strike. People have been saying to do a general strike. I mean, my whole lifetime, every couple of years, someone says general strike, but it never actually happens. And my question is about the potentials, what work has been done, is being done, planned to be done, around how do you reach the workers on campus who make the campus actually run, to shut down the campus, to actually shut it down, because as Hassan was saying, students are not workers, they're in an impasse position. So what's y'all's positions on bringing labor into the movement to actually strike and shut down the production, shut down the campus, if not all of society?
Can I see hands again? Yeah, let's have you. Over here. Thank you.
Hi, my question is about continuing action into the next school year. So my campus encampment at the University of Washington in Seattle lasted around 3 to 4 weeks, and in my opinion was very successful. We didn't get financial divestment. They claimed that they didn't have any direct investments in Boeing, even though there's a very clear engineering student to Boeing pipeline at our school. But they really started putting pressure on the encampment to dissolve, around graduation and around when summer was happening. And they intentionally scheduled discussions to begin again in the fall of this year, when a lot of the organizers would be graduating and a lot of new people would come in that didn't have anything to do with the original movement. I'm lucky enough to be a super senior, so I've got 1 extra quarter going back. Thank you. And I just wanted to ask, what ways can we approach continuing this movement into the next year with those obstacles in our way?
Thank you.
We also had one more in the chat, if I could share that one.
Oh yeah, please.
So we've had 50 to 70 people in the live stream, and we have a question. On the topic of escalation, how do you advise that we manage adventurism going forward, and what should we do as a coalition in this respect? How do we guard against opportunists and protect particularly Black, Brown, trans, and Native people on the ground?
Do y'all mind if I start?
You can go ahead. You can answer all four or pick the ones that you want to speak to.
I wanted to say how fucking sick it is that there's so many people here from like all over the country, low-key, like Seattle and Idaho, and like everyone on this panel is from everywhere, and I want to be your friend. So like, let's do that. I can touch on a couple of things. I would say at our campus, abolitionist work had been happening for a hot minute. And a lot of the people that were like our organizing grandparents in this cause had been working towards that goal. Cops on Campus at UMass had been happening for a while. Also, our graduate students had a strike the year before, so 2022 to 23. And their unions and the strength of that union has been huge. And then that also, so I guess the question of like, Palestine definitely radicalized a lot of the student body, but in terms of radical political organizing at UMass specifically, there is a storied legacy of that. We also had a 5-year-long campaign to divest from fossil fuels, and UMass was one of the first, if not the first university to commit to that as well, even though they like didn't actually do that. In terms of labor on campus, we have been very fortunate to be able to work with librarian unions, staff unions, faculty unions in our fight, and that they have been very willing to make Palestine one of their negotiating chips when it comes to their own battles with the university. So I would say that labor is beginning to be more and more tight-knit with our resistant movement. But I think the more like relationships are built and the stronger those relationships get, the more power we'll build. I think so far our conversations with labor have been limited to like faculty and librarians and haven't reached like people who aren't already in the bubble of academia somewhat. But the more we can expand that, I think the stronger it'll get. And I also wanted to thank the person who asked a question on the live stream about protecting Black people and trans people and people at higher risks in these encampments, because that shit's like really fucking important, and challenging conversations around safety have been, I think, a conflict point for a lot of different people in a lot of different encampments, trying to figure out how to materially keep each other safe. But I'm hoping that my other co-panelists can speak to that more.
I'll start with the first question. So on Columbia campus, we had an SJP that existed prior to October 7th. However, we weren't very active, and we were kind of just operating as a book club. So when October 7th happened, SJP kind of took it on ourselves to release a statement, and then all these other student organizations came out in support, and that was the beginning of the coalition. Started from like 5 orgs to 180 plus, and then all the schools across campus, grad schools, coming up with their own school-specific collective or organization to continue supporting things. And I think a lot of the work within the Quad Coalition was made possible due to the support from the Student Workers Union, so labor part. They are a very strong force, and in the past 2 years, I think, 2 years ago, they were responsible for facilitating having the workers shut things down. Don't quote me. I wasn't there 2 years ago, but they, I think, were able to negotiate better agreements in their contract and higher pay. So they were a huge force in just helping us make things happen and make things move. In terms of getting a way to organizer workers to actually shut down campus. That's been something that unfortunately has just been talked about and has not unfolded the way we need to see it happen, but I think it holds a lot of potential, and with so many different things going on, I think it just kind of went to the side, but hopefully that is a area of focus with the upcoming school year. With the third question, I believe, I don't know what continuing the movement. I think reminding your fellow students that you guys are in a position where you guys hold power and you have the ability to make the admin's life absolute hell, whether that's by screaming outside their apartment windows every night for a month or just holding a sit-in or protest every time they tell you no, but understanding that you literally have the power to just, you make the demands. You don't wait for them to concede. And I think that has kind of been a disconnect until, the very end of the encampment around negotiations, that we don't need to concede to what the admin is telling us. We're going to take what we want and we're going to demand it. If you don't give it to us, then sucks for you. And then for the question from the live stream, that's a difficult one to answer because a lot of that happened at Columbia, and I don't know what is the right way forward around protecting the most vulnerable in our orgs and our groups. I think movement spaces, especially Palestinian solidarity spaces, on first glance seems to be majority women and femmes, and I don't know where the men are at, but there's that. And the few men that you do see in these spaces, there's unfortunately some that exhibit predatory behavior and, sometimes are opportunists. And I think it's a cultural thing that needs to shift, making sure that the men who are in these spaces with you are taking it upon themselves to check one another, making sure there are measures for accountability and structure, and making sure there's no one person or few people that are allocating all the power and, becoming the face of the movement or decision makers, because that, does not go well, especially with certain personality types. And, when people do speak up, when you do hear complaints about certain individuals violating boundaries of consent or sexual harassment on a consistent basis, I think that's indicative that this person might be a problem. Again, you can have many people, push back against one individual, and if the culture of the group or collective is not set up so that they actually take that serious, I think it's not going to move. So, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely, the movement largely being populated by women and femmes is definitely something that is so real. And for example, at our encampment, most of the people who were arrested and who were beat up by the cops were brown and black men, women, and gender non-conforming folks. Maybe a handful of white people were in there. And as the cops were actively beating on us, I was seeing men running away, and I was like, what is going on? What are we doing? But yeah, how to keep the most vulnerable populations safe is something I'm always questioning when it comes to this stuff, as well as what it means for an action to be safe for them. Because I think that when it comes to keeping people safe, you first have to define safety. And I think that that's something that's constantly shifting. And I think that, yeah, one of the ways that in that moment we were trying to do that was when it came to like supply runs or food runs. We would have someone with a megaphone in the middle of the circle. Can I get 2 white people with backpacks to go get the food? 2 white people with backpacks. And yeah, I mean, how to actually keep folks, I didn't answer the question because I don't have an answer for that. It's something that's always on my mind, I think, as well as the question on labor and the movement. I think that relationship and that like coalition is not something that exists for us yet, and I think it's very necessary because looking all throughout history and all throughout all of the revolutionary movements that have occurred internationally, labor has been one of the key players in that. And I think that that's definitely something that moving forwards, we're all going to have to contend with and figure out how we are going to bring those people into the space and how, because those are the people with the power. The people in power can't stay in power if they don't have labor to exploit. Yeah, and then the question of what radical organizing existed on our campus beforehand and if Palestine was what radicalized folks. I think that before October 7th, we had a lot of people on our campus with radical politics, but I don't really think anyone, and I'll hold myself accountable, I'll be included in that, really did anything with those politics. Our SJP was operating largely as like a cultural organization, and from the standpoint that preserving culture was a means of resistance, which it for sure is and is very necessary. But I think that after October 7th, and especially with the rise of the encampments, I think that was when militancy really began to exist within those spaces. Yeah.
I think I spoke to you before that there wasn't like a lot of student organizing happening on campus before the occupation and before the establishment of the Gaza Solidarity encampment on our campus. To touch on like the labor as a way to like actually disrupt the process of the school, something about Humboldt was that our school completely stopped operating. Like we were pushed onto Zoom after 2 days of the occupation, and that was, not that I don't think it's viable to organize with the like different labor unions that are happening at your school, but like we stopped the day-to-day production of our school because the school saw us as a legitimate threat, and like they just refused to continue to have school happening because they were so scared of people coming to the occupation and joining it. They're like, don't go to school. They basically, and then they elicited this like huge substantive suspension to even push that further to make sure that people wouldn't come. So I think that there is like a level of creativity that we can have when we think about total disruption and total halting, because at our school, like historically, working with unions has not, from what people were talking about, has not really worked, or just wasn't a viable like strategy for us in that moment. What was more viable was just the fact that the school was completely like had no idea how to respond and had failed so utterly by bringing in the police so early, which kind of brings me into this conversation about safety and methods of escalation. Like the school I think that from the beginning, there is this sense on the campus that like, because the students had simply occupied a building and were not actually like, other than occupying a building rather than occupying the lawn, we're not actually escalating, like not having this antagonistic stance. and the police were brought in and brutalized people immediately. Also, the front line of our occupation was like trans indigenous people. And so to have that be seen, it was mixed, like a sort of like mixed racial coalition, but having the police respond with this like really unwarranted violence, I think made people really understand in the occupation that the police bring like this feeling of dissafety. Like the police are the perpetrators of violence on the campus. And I think what made people feel safe to continue to defend the space, and that there is a constant like desire by the occupiers to defend the space, was things like jail support, experience, and community networks that will hold people after they take brave action. You know, like if we make people feel as though people will, which we showed up in droves to jail support. You know, like people were standing outside of the jails as people were getting out with cigarettes, with food, driving people home. So making people feel as though there is a network to hold them after they take brave action, which has immediate results. Like we were able to see that because people bravely defended the occupation, it was able to go on and create like this truly huge disruption and change the course of student occupations following. All of that was reaffirmed as a viable path by the fact that students were able to receive support afterwards and be held by each other, and make sure that that taking risks did not mean that they were like left to deal with the consequences of the court system alone, or with the consequences of having their fucking heads beaten in alone. You know, like those things, having like a strong community surrounding people who decide to take risks, I think is what will allow people to continue to escalate against and like provide like a serious threat to the empire, which ultimately makes us all unsafe. So that'd be my answer.
I guess like starting from the last question from Zoom, which is about like, I guess I'm not sure if I fully heard it, but it's about like adventurism and keeping predominantly Black, brown, gender non-binary people, women safe from like escalatory actions taken by others in the organizing space. I think I was learning a lot from what you were saying about the organizations. Like the forefront of the movement is predominantly femme, and I think there is, of course, you will find many like people of color, diasporic people, Black people, indigenous people on the front lines of the movement. I'm considering something that I think hasn't been spoken about a lot, which is, of course, like most police are men. The police are also multiracial. Like, you know, University of Chicago Police Department, many of them, if not most, are recruited from the surrounding community. There are also Black women included. And many of the police who were most violent and brutal were also, I would hear from a lot of femme people that were organizing that, you know, they felt uncomfortable on a basis of like, you know, that there was some kind of sexual harassment dynamic also with what they were doing. You know, we also know there's like a high rate of domestic violence among the police. So I think that on one hand speaks to like the broader cultural conditions that you were talking about, that all organizing, like kind of, we see the dynamics of it intensifying. But also I think, and you were saying something, I think, about, you know, the police inside of your head, the cops in your head, yeah. So I think there is something to that, but also I think we should think really critically about these things. Like, I don't think it's so simple. You know, like, of course, one of the reasons that the mood has kind of changed since Biden stepped down is because Kamala Harris is a Black woman. And this, right, like, or even, you know, the fact that the discourse of community and, you know, breaking the boundaries between the university and the community is so strong, somehow it hasn't led to a sustained reflection on why are all of the private security forces armed, like the unarmed private security forces allied, who are low wage workers that just stand out on the block basically. They are from the surrounding neighborhood of the university, and they, like, I I don't know, this isn't like a sustained thing. I was maybe trying to start some kind of project on this, but like reaching out to these people who are kind of on the outskirts of the encampment, who are always present. Like I talked to a few of them, and many of them, they didn't know what Palestine was. When I talked to them a little bit, they started to, they were on board pretty quickly. Like they could see parallels between the violence and their own communities, and you know, even move, like there were a lot of productive conversations that were had. So that's one thing I would say. You know, if the Allied security officers at University of Chicago decided to support a protest we did, that would be really huge. And like, you know, we used the fact that students worked in like museums or admissions offices to help us with the protests that we planned in those areas. In terms of like sustained labor organizing, there's the Graduate Student Union at our campus that has adopted more pro-Palestine positions over time, and like was able to do like successfully negotiate, like successfully get a collective bargaining agreement, stuff like that. But in terms of like general strike across U.S. society, I think like that's a structural problem of like where labor is now, like labor organizing, I should say. And then the other questions, but I think I said enough.
Say one thing about the question that you asked about how do we sort of like moving forward into the next year and this constant cycling of people graduating and then not being part of student organizing. Like the best way to combat that is by breaking down this division between community member and student and between alumni and student, and saying that and as students, as people who are actively in school, taking it upon yourself to punch holes in that every time it comes up through the administration, and acknowledging that just because someone graduates doesn't mean that they don't have something viable to add. It doesn't mean that they're not part of them and that they're not affected by the school's decisions. So like taking it upon ourselves to just not contribute to that narrative of like, because that is what feeds the outside agitator narrative, right? Is basically like this idea that community members can't have a say in what happens with the school, but the school gets to dictate the lives of everyone who lives in the city that the school operates in. So yeah, if we're talking about like student privilege, like using your student privilege to make sure that that doesn't happen is what allows movements to be sustained and use the school as an operating ground rather than containing movements to the school.
Thank you. I'd like to really thank all of the panelists and all of the audience. I appreciate you all. Thank you.
I like your answers a lot.
Thank you, you too.
You were really great.
Yeah, it was really nice to meet you.